You do at the regional level, however you define it, that which makes most sense at the regional level. You do at the national level what makes most sense at the national. You do at the supranational level in Europe, in Brussels, what makes sense there. The logic starts from the bottom and moves up. In Norway, in most Scandinavian countries, Nordic countries, local government collects income tax. In Norway, they keep up to 14%, send the rest to Oslo, and then there's a redistribution based on need. That turns our fiscal federalism completely on its head. So that's the decentralized. So I'm not saying urban should support rural, and you can have a lot of debate about the resource economy contribution versus the so-called knowledge economy. The Toronto banking, mining finance sector is a leader in the world about mining finance. It wouldn't exist if it wasn't for their link to mines. So there's interdependencies all over the place. I don't want to get into a rural-urban battle of the balance sheets. Hopefully that addressed what you're...
There is a question from online, from Bill McDonald, and he asks, have you found any examples of regions where they've gotten the urban-rural collaboration right?
Well, internationally, you can look at lots of places where they're experimenting with this, and some structurally, and in my own research, and anybody who's been there, in Nordic countries, local government is based on the original church parish areas initially. So the municipality takes in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 individual communities that were within interactive proximity of each other. And so the local government, right in some of these places, it's hundreds of years old, was built on that locality level functionality. And so the governance capacity in those places is pretty much what I'm arguing for. That doesn't mean they have it all right. In my own research, you always balance strategy and structure. So you can get the structures as right as you can, but you still have to have appropriate economic development strategies, social, environmental, and you have to be able to deliver on them. Implementation, the capacity. So, and there's lots of innovation across Canada. There's lots of innovation around the world. One example we often use is New York City has a tax sharing arrangement with the communities in the Catskills, upriver from New York City, because they depend on the people in the Catskills to be stewards of the water supply, without which New York City would cease to exist. So they send tax money upriver. So we've only touched on the ways to monetize the value rural provides to urban, which would address substantially some of what was hinted at in the first question.
Are there any other questions? Yeah. I actually have a question. If we were to think of something at the root, I don't want to go necessarily super causal mechanism sort of thing, but if we were to say, how would land use planning, if we changed how we did land use planning, how would it make things shift? And have you ever thought about that?
Well, I think that's a great example of strategy and structure interpenetrating. You can't do good land use planning unless you have staff and authority and either functional region administrative boundaries or functional region cooperation mechanisms to develop the plans with solid, and I'm not a land use planner, but solid technical land use planning know-how, appropriate consultation with the community and business and other stakeholders in a region, the development of appropriate land use plans, and then the capacity to actually enforce land use plans. And so one of the challenges with this stuff is, oh, it's such a mess, what do we do? And I think you can, I'm big on, years ago, the Canadian Bishop statement talked about transcendent reform. We're not going to win with revolution, the nastiest people come out on, Orwell was right. Transcendent reform, well, can we bite off some incremental changes that actually lead to fundamental change as you implement them? And maybe that's wishful thinking, but you got to start somewhere. So I think land use planning, for example, is such an obvious necessity. If you look at the outskirts of St. John's now, if you look at rural Newfoundland in general, the solid waste dumps that are next to rivers, where they're trying to promote tourism or develop recreational fishery, or the number of sewage systems in beautiful, pristine rural Newfoundland that flows into bays where they want to develop aquaculture. You just need some governance capacity to understand, determine, and enforce the public good. So if you picked off some issues that are implementable, it's like any community development project. You're not going to get everybody liking each other and cooperating from the start. So pick a doable project and get the right people together on it. And I think land use planning is one great example of where you can start. I think we have a question back
Thank
here.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I'm just trying to add on to the point what Dietra made. When you have like a one industry town like Grand Falls, that was actually a planned town, one industry town, and the capacity was there. But what now where you see that the mill has gone under, and now they're actually looking for support from, like you said, St. John's, which is the exact opposite of what you just said there. I guess it's like an enigma, so to speak. So you have these other towns that aren't planned, but like you said, they're revolved around the fishery, and you have St. John's itself is an unplanned city. But like you said, you have these one industry towns like Grand Falls, for example, where everything was formatted in a way that it was good rural planning, but now it's, I guess, devolving from that. What's your comment or scenario on that?
Well, you know, it's a paper mill town, and the Staples thesis is all about boom and bust. And my work, sometimes the folks who are the urban intelligentsia, we're the centers of the creative wealth producing, and all the rest is a drag. There are lots of rural places that die. There's no guarantees of success for anybody. And just as government isn't any good at picking winners, though, government isn't any good at picking losers. So I'm all for building capacity, and people and communities and organizations taking more responsibility with supports and cooperation, federal, provincial. But as long as it's Uncle Premier or Uncle Ottawa come to our rescue, that's the same challenge in the developing world. And so sometimes building capacity at a regional level where there's declining industries, fishing, forestry, technology change, global market change, you ain't turning this around, it's a better capacity to manage decline. And I think Clyde Wells recognized that when they set up, or we helped set up the economic zones. It would help people take ownership and actually acknowledge the demographic trends. And through regional strategic plans, do the SWOT analysis. My God, this sector isn't looking good long term. So if we don't come up with some alternatives or make some tough choices, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, we have another question. We're almost out of time, but we do have another question from the internet, yes? And are people still with us on the phone? I guess not.
Yeah.
Oh, hello. And if anyone on the phone has a question, do just pipe up, you know. Hang on now.